There's a common misconception that John Carpenter's Halloween was a massive hit from day one, and a sequel was immediately greenlit and went straight into production. But that's simply not the case. John Carpenter's Halloween took a little while to catch on. When it first dropped, it bombed, both critically and commercially. Positive word of mouth upon re-releases is what helped make John Carpenter's Halloween a success and made it the movie that it is today. So talk of a sequel didn't really begin right away. John Carpenter and Deborah Hill went off to pursue other things in their career, and once Halloween really started to take off, of course, Dino De Laurentiis, Erwin Yablans, Mustafa Akkad, and everybody involved wanted to make a sequel. The sequel we all got in 1981 is revered as one of, if not the best sequel in the Halloween franchise by most who you'd ask. But it is not the sequel that was originally planned. The original plan for Halloween 2 was something very different. After being approached to do a sequel, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill agreed. Carpenter and Hill were going to write the screenplay and they would produce the film, but John didn't really have interest in directing the film. Funny enough, somebody that was offered the directing job was none other than Deborah Hill herself. Yes, that's correct. She was offered the job to do Halloween 2, but she declined. You see, John and Deborah never had any intention of Halloween becoming some episodic series of Michael Myers coming back to Haddonfield and killing new teenagers or teenagers that survived previous films year after year. That's not what they wanted to do. They both wanted to pursue other things with their careers. So if they were going to be a part of making another Halloween movie, they were okay with writing it and shepherding it in a new direction, but not doing the same thing over again. So the idea that Carpenter and Hill had, as referenced in Fangoria magazine, was that Halloween 2 was going to take place years after the first film. Jamie Lee Curtis was going to come back as Laurie Strode, but this movie was not going to take place in Haddonfield. Haddonfield, Illinois is synonymous with Michael Myers. It's just what we've come to know and love and associate the character with. But it wouldn't have been that way had this Halloween 2 happened. Haddonfield might not be nearly as iconic as it ended up becoming. The idea was to have this take place in a high-rise apartment building. That's right. Halloween 2. Halloween in a high-rise. Whatever you want to call it. Laurie Strode was going to be living there. It was going to be set in a different town, and she was going to be under very tight security. Now, why that is, who's to say? I mean, one would assume that it would have to do with the fact that they would have assumed that Michael might have lived since he disappeared at the end of the original Halloween, and Laurie was scared that he'd end up coming back for her. So she would have been under lock and key, basically. Another idea they had for this movie was that it was going to be in 3D. Yes, initially Halloween 2 was going to be a 3D film in a high-rise. Now, they still toyed with the 3D idea after they dropped the high-rise idea with the hospital location, but initially those were two of the ideas they had. So what ended up changing? Why did this not become the Halloween 2 that we ended up getting? Well, part of that was because John Carpenter really couldn't crack the story. I think that, as evidenced by what he has said years later, even with the Halloween 2 we got, he didn't really have a passion to come back and tell a Michael Myers story. So to take Michael Myers out of Haddonfield wasn't an easy task for him. It didn't come naturally because the passion wasn't exactly there to do that in the first place. So when they end up making Halloween 2, the Halloween 2 we end up getting, it's a lot easier. It's tried and true. You come back to Haddonfield, you pick up the moment the first film left off, and you kind of just go from there. But this idea would have made them have to think outside the box a little bit more. And it's probably the reason that John could never really tackle the idea and break through. Another interesting thing about this Halloween 2 is that Dr. Loomis, played by Donald Pleasance, was still set to return. Although this would have been a new setting entirely, the doctor was still going to be chasing his crazed patient. Now, interestingly, it kind of makes sense if you know John Carpenter's career why he might have wanted to do something like this in the first place. See, in the 70s, John made a made-for-TV, low-budget film, Somebody's Watching Me. And that was about a stalker in a high-rise. So the thought process was maybe John saw this opportunity because of the success of Halloween to take the budget that was going to be given to him and almost try to make a better version of Someone's Watching Me. A bigger budget pseudo remake, just with Michael Myers in the picture now. It was no secret that John, although proud of Someone's Watching Me, was definitely hampered by budgetary limits and couldn't really make the film that a filmmaker, a creative, would want to make. Halloween 2 in a high-rise almost seemed like retribution for that. This idea never came to pass. As time went on and they couldn't get the story right, they ended up just going back to, again, what was tried and true. We got Halloween 2, the movie that most people know and love today, and the rest is history. It's unsure if there's any kind of draft of this script that exists out there. If I had to guess, since John openly talked about being unable to crack the story, I don't think it ever got finished. But I do believe there is a draft, or was a draft, of at least some pages. And I think I speak for most fans when I say that I'd love to see that. I'd love to see what the tone of this movie was going to be and who the characters were going to be, what Michael Myers' reason for coming to this new town was going to be, so on and so forth. I think that the curiosity of that, the morbid curiosity of seeing this take place in that high-rise, or even just knowing what John was aiming for, something to really make you think and keep you up at night. Again, Halloween 2 ended up coming out, and it did well. You know, a lot of fans today love the movie and they consider it to be the best. Now, for some, you may be more than happy with the Halloween 2 we ended up getting, and I think most people are. But I do want you to ask yourself, if you could have had this Halloween 2, would you have wanted to? If you could go back in time and have this be the direction the franchise took, would you have been happy with that? I think I would. But we'll never actually know what Halloween in a high-rise would be like. At least not yet.